Before we get into today's video, I just want to let you guys know that this video is for educational purposes only. Please remember to be kind to everybody everywhere, in your everyday life, in your home, in the grocery store, and especially in the comment section down below. Please do not show hate to anybody, anywhere. So good morning, good morning, good morning. How is everybody doing today? I hope you all are having an amazing day. I hope you all have had a wonderful week. I hope everybody is feeling good, feeling great, pumped up. You know, we're doing this thing. We're doing this thing called life. And times are a little nutty, okay? So in today's video, we're going to be talking about a situation that happened back in the 1980s. And there's a very interesting element to this case. The whole thing is interesting, but this part is interesting, and it has to do with prison reform, okay? So stay with me here. Before we get into it, though, if you don't already know, hi, my name is Christina. I do have a second channel, which is Casually Christina. We just do things way more casually over there. I also have a Patreon. My Patreon is for 18 and up, and over there we talk about more personal stuff. We go live over there. It is a really good time if you're 18 up and you'd like to join. There's also a $2 tier for all of the true crime stuff that cannot go onto YouTube due to their terms and policies. That goes over on my Patreon under the $2 tier. Just make sure you read the About section and what each tier offers before you join, though. And if you can't find it in the description box below, all you got to do is Google Christina Randall Patreon, Patreon, and you'll be able to find me, because a lot of y'all always ask me about that. So just Google it, you'll find it. I'm also on Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, as well as Like to Know It. And Like to Know It is a platform where I post a lot of the links to the things that I enjoy, that I like, that y'all ask about, like this black top right here, these earrings, makeup, stuff like that, furniture, workout gear, sneakers that I run in, just all the little things that I use and like, or that y'all ask me about. I post those links on my Like to Know It. All of the links to those platforms are down in the description box if you would like to come and check me out. Okay, so let's talk about Jerry, the animal, which he called himself. He nicknamed himself that, McFadden. Now, before I can tell y'all about Jerry, I need to bring y'all all the way back to July 8th of 1985. So July 8th of 1985, the director of the Texas Department of Corrections released a letter that's basically saying that the Texas prison systems were way overcrowded. I mean, I feel like we've been here before, or we're here again. And as a matter of fact, they were over 94% full in all of their prisons. This became a discussion because in the 1970s, there were two men, David Ruiz, and he was actually an inmate that was in prison, and an employee of the prison system, the Department of Corrections there in Texas, named William Estelle. Both filed class action lawsuits against the Texas Department of Corrections. This actually ended up being the longest running prisoners lawsuit in U.S. history. They said all of the typical things that I would expect for them to say, and the things that we talk about all the time, that were things like the prisons were very overcrowded. And because of that, there was inadequate security, which of course is then putting the inmates as well as the employees at risk. I know there's some correctional officers watching this right now going, well, I'll be danged. It's 2024 and things ain't changed. Yeah, hello. They also, in the lawsuit, talked about health care, that it was unsafe working conditions, and also they mentioned severe disciplinary procedures. Now, after 8 years of pre-trial with this case, the inmate and the employee finally went to trial, and the trial lasted 129 days. Now, of course, the state of Texas contested every single claim that was made. However, in the end, the state of Texas did rule in favor of the inmate and the employee. So they won their case. Now, there was an agreement with this lawsuit that the state would limit the inmate population to 95% max. So that would assure them to not be overcrowded. That would also allegedly take care of the understaffing, and then that would be security issues, all that stuff, okay? That was part of the agreement. Also in this part of the agreement, they had to separate the hardcore offenders from the just like regular prisoners. as well as hire more guards to improve medical treatment. Now, the part of this lawsuit and ruling that is important for today's video is the reduction of the existing population of prisoners that were incarcerated. After this lawsuit and this agreement, Texas agreed to implement more early release programs for good behavior, either through parole or probation. However, this early release program that they implemented may have went too far because they ended up releasing all kind of convicted criminals. Again, I feel like we've heard this before, even more recently, right? Okay. Now, these criminals were only serving a small fraction of their sentence, and some of these crimes, they didn't need to be the ones to be let out, okay? Old Pawpaw down here that keeps running, the stop sign and not paying his tickets, and he got sentenced to a year and a day. Let's let Pawpaw out as long as he ain't hurt nobody and snatch his license or something like that if we're worried about him. But instead, they decided to just start releasing people, okay? And as a result of this, the natural thing that happened was the recidivism rate went way up. So people were getting out early and coming right back in, doing the same crimes. And the crime rate went back up again drastically. Now, this brings us to the situation that happened in Hawkins, Texas. So you have 18-year-old Suzanne Harrison, 20-year-old Gina Turner, and 19-year-old Brian Boone. They were all living in Hawkins, Texas in 1986. Now, let me tell you guys a little bit about Hawkins. Hawkins was a very small town of only about 1,000 people. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody looks out for everybody type of thing. At the time, it was described as a largely blue-collar town, and it was built on the sweat and sore muscles of the oil industry. So basically, everybody in this town that wasn't like a teacher, an officer, or stuff like that was oil workers, hardworking, muscles, working with their physical body, blue-collar employees. The town was known to have reasonable and affordable housing for the workers and plenty of cash to go around the town when the oil field was booming. It was and still is a very close-knit community. It's a place known for common sense values. Again, everybody looks out for everybody, and if other people's children's need straightening, they straighten them. You know what I mean? When your neighbor's kid is out there being a hoodlum, it ain't nothing for 3 or 4 neighbors to come out and snatch them up. And it was like a family thing. That is how this community was. As a matter of fact, most people did not even think twice about leaving their front doors unlocked or their purses like in their vehicles overnight with the doors unlocked. And when they would get up the next morning, purses, wallets, money would still be in the car untouched. And if your kid got in trouble back then in school, you better believe the parents handled it when they got home. So Suzanne, Gina, and Brian were living in a lovely place. Suzanne was an only child who was very well liked. She was active in her church. She was really popular. She was a cheerleader in her high school. She was smart, and she planned to pursue a career in education. Now, Gina Turner was Suzanne's best friend. Gina was very well liked by everyone as well, and she was even voted Miss Hawkins High School, and she was described as academically gifted, and she was even made the valedictorian of her graduating class. She was also studying at this time at the junior college and going to school to be a nurse. Then we have Brian. Brian Boone was a football player that had recently graduated from Hawkins High School, and he was known as Handsome Brian. He was an above average student, and he was known to be a gifted athlete who played football, and he also played basketball before he began going to the local college as well. He was known to be nice to everyone, and he really liked to read. Suzanne, Gina, and Brian were a close-knit group of friends, and they spent most of their free time together. The local teenagers in town really liked hanging out at a small beach on Lake Hawkins called The Point. This little beachy area, The Point, was the spot back then. Okay, teenagers would go to The Point. each weekend by the dozens, and they would enjoy the freedom of youth. They would all be laying around in their groups on this sandy beach. They'd have their towels laid out. They'd have their vehicles pulled up with the doors open, windows down, music blaring. The girls would be laid out there rubbing baby oil all over their skin. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Okay, some of us got sun damage now because of all the baby oil we used to use back then. Anyways, this was a very safe and popular place for the young adults to hang out. And as a matter of fact, none of the parents even batted an eye when their teenagers or young adults were going to the point. On May 4th of 1986, it was a warm day, the beginning of summer, and so Suzanne and Gina decided to go and spend the day at Lake Hawkins. They planned to meet up with Brian there, and he lived with his uncle who lived very close to the lake. All three of them were looking forward to having a fun afternoon, laying in the sun, hanging out in the water, and just having a good time with each other. So they grabbed their gear and they headed down to the lake. Everything seemed to be going well until they noticed a stranger approaching them. Fast forward to later that evening, around 10 p.m. actually, when the three of them did not return back to their homes that evening. Their families became very worried, and they went to go and look for them because they were described as good kids that would not make curfew, not come back home. So when the families went out to look for them, this is when they found Brian's truck, and it was found at the lake, and it still had Suzanne and Gina's purses inside of it, but there was no other trace of them anywhere around. At this point, their families decided that it was time to get the cops involved, and they went and reported them missing. The very next day, a maintenance worker at Barnwell State Park stumbled upon something horrific. The employee found Suzanne's fully exposed body lying in the bushes just off of the path. Nearby was a pair of shorts and undergarments, and they were later identified as belonging to Gina. But where was Gina? The area ended up being taped off and searched very thoroughly by the local authorities, but there were still no signs of Gina or Brian anywhere. The families were, as you can imagine, holding out hope that the other two would be found, all while being devastated and panicking in the way that Suzanne was found. However, 5 days later, Brian and Gina's bodies were found in a canal just outside of Ore City, which was about 40 miles away from Lake Hawkins, where the group was hanging out the day that they all went missing. The medical examiner determined that Suzanne had multiple blows to the face and had actually been strangled with her own underwear. They also found that she had endured unimaginable things and physical torture, especially to her lower body region. Brian and Gina's bodies, however, were much further along in the decomposition process, so they had to be identified with dental records. However, the medical examiner could tell that they had both passed away from point-blank gunshot wounds, but it was hard for the medical examiner to tell if they had been subjected to any of the other physical stuff that Suzanne had obviously went through. This is when the real investigation began. And as you guys can imagine, the whole community's involved, okay? Small community, like we talked about in the beginning. People are mad, okay? They're looking at everybody. Who could do this? Who would do this? The investigators interviewed witnesses who had been on that lake that day, and one witness said that they saw a bushy-haired man covered in tattoos. Remember, this is the 1980s too, okay? Covered in tattoos hanging around the lake that Sunday evening. According to that witness, the tattoos on this man stood out to them because he had several satanic symbols and imagery and distorted looking demonic faces tattooed on different parts of his body. And on his chest was a tattoo that said "Lonesome Loner." As they continued to investigate, they found a couple that said that they had been approached around 7:30 p.m. that evening by a guy with a firearm. And they described the guy as having big hair and that he demanded them to give him money. When this couple told this bushy-haired man that they didn't have any money, The man apparently threatened to take the woman instead. The boyfriend of this woman offered the man a beer, which they said seemed to calm him down enough for the couple to quickly jump in their car and leave. They would go on to tell the investigator that they then saw this man get into a blue and white Ford Bronco. They gave investigators the license plate number, and they also said that they saw the same tattoos as the last witness and the lonesome loner on his chest. The following day, on Tuesday, a police officer saw, what do you know, a blue Bronco that matched the description driving down the road, so he ended up pulling the person over. When they pulled the person over, driving it was a man who fit the description that the witnesses gave. It was a 38-year-old man named Jerry McFadden. He had the lonesome loner tattoo on his chest as well. They immediately took him into questioning. Now, let me tell y'all about Gerald, who also goes by Jerry McFadden. Jerry was born on March 21st of 1948 in Haskell County, Texas. He was a divorced father of two. I read that he was 19. He married his wife at the time, who was 15, which I don't think would have been that big of a difference back in them days. And they went on to have these two children, and they ended up getting divorced later on. Now, he worked multiple different jobs. He worked in the oil industry, was in this small town. He also worked as a lineman. He also worked for a telephone company. He went by Jerry, but when he was brought into the police station, he asked everyone to call him Animal. Okay. When asked, Jerry admitted to running into that couple at the lake, but he said that he was just kidding with them. You know, the one where he walked up to the couple and had the woman and said, "Give me all your money." He said that it was a fake woman, that he wasn't being serious, and that he was just pulling a prank on them. When investigators did a background check on Jerry, this is when they found out that he had recently, just 1 year prior, been put on parole. Yep. In 1985, after serving less than 5 years of a 15-year sentence for aggravated SA of a young woman who was actually a secretary, Jerry had taken this secretary, this young woman, and he her. And Jerry had only recently moved to Hawkins to live with his mother and his sister that lived in this small town. Now, the reason why he was released early was because of this whole lawsuit thing where they were releasing these inmates, earlier. So that's why he only served 5 years on a 15-year sentence, you guys. We're not talking about somebody that went, was down and out with his luck and had 6 kids that he needed to buy Christmas for. So he went in and robbed a bank or something, which I don't think is good either. But context kind of matters with stuff like this. Anyways, when the investigators looked further into Jerry's criminal history, this is when they realized that was actually the second time that Jerry had been put on parole. Oh yeah, his first parole was for a double R word that he spent less than 5 years in prison for as well. He actually had a criminal record that went all the way back to 1966 when he was arrested for burglary at the age of 18. So when they're deciding to release inmates early, don't really seem like he should have been at the top of the list. They also found out that Jerry had dropped out of school when he was in the 7th grade and that things basically just went straight downhill from there. His first victim, though, was in 1973, and it was a 14-year-old young girl. The second victim was that secretary that we know of. I mean, who really knows? But the second one was the secretary that we were just talking about. She was only 18 years old. Jerry also admitted to doing the same thing to one of his middle school teachers just before he was arrested for the first case. And again, the whole reason he was able to get out early after all of that other stuff, the 14-year-old, the 18, all of this stuff, was because of this new early release program thing, just so they could make room to bring new ones in. Anyways, if you're doing the math here, this means that Jerry had only been out for a year and he was still on parole when Suzanne, Gina, and Brian were all attacked. Jerry, of course, though, denied having anything to do with their deaths. He did, however, tell the investigators that he frequently camped at this Lake Hawkins, but he said that he never saw the 3 victims at the lake that day. The investigators went on to charge him anyways, and Jerry was officially charged for the killing, the essay and the murder of Suzanne because they found personal of his DNA, if you know what I mean, stains that matched Jerry. They were found on Suzanne. And so the investigators believed that they had the best chance of getting Jerry convicted for at least for her murder, since there'd be no explanation for those bodily fluids to be found on Suzanne if he didn't do what was done to her. But because there wasn't like a lot of physical evidence for Gina and Brian, because their bodies were so decomposed, the state chose not to press charges for them. And of course, their families were very disappointed, but the investigators made sure to let them know that they were going to do everything that they could to keep looking for enough evidence in order to charge him for that as well. Now, while he was in custody, before the trial happened, Jerry managed to escape, okay? So, again, small town, everybody knows everybody. This is a horrific scene. This is this 3 young people, bright futures, good kids, going to the point where all the young adults hang out at, safe place, They've got him locked up. The town feels like, whew, okay, we're going to get justice. And then he escapes. You want to talk about people locking their doors and their car doors then? On July 9th of 1986, Jerry took a 24-year-old female dispatcher hostage and used her as a human shield as he was escaping. He ended up forcing this young woman into her car and they took off. Eventually, because it was so hot outside, the car ended up overheating and it broke down on the side of the road. And so then Jerry had no choice but to start walking. Him and the woman that he had took eventually hopped onto a boxcar on a train. Now you can only imagine what she's thinking at this point. Like, it is not, she's thinking probably the worst, okay? She ended up being held hostage for a total of 16 hours, which probably felt like 16 years to her, before she was able to escape from him in this boxcar. This began the largest manhunt in the history of Texas. Thousands of people were searching for this guy, Jerry. The next day in Big Sandy, Texas, law enforcement officials had Jerry completely surrounded in an abandoned house where they were able to recapture Jerry and put him back into custody. Now, Jerry's trial began in the summer of 1987. After 2 weeks of testimony, it only took the jury 35 minutes to convict him. I mean, hello. In July of 1987, a judge sentenced Jerry to the death penalty by lethal injection. While waiting, he submitted appeal after appeal after appeal after appeal to try to get his sentence overturned. However, all the appeals were denied. And on October 14th of 1999, Jerry was put to death. Suzanne's mother and brother were present in the viewing room when this happened. And when Jerry was asked if he wanted to give a final statement, he remained silent. He never admitted to anything. He never showed any remorse for anything that he did to Suzanne, Gina, or Brian. And many thought that this would be the last that they ever heard of Jerry. However, it wasn't. In February of 2019, Jerry's DNA was matched to a cold case in Portland, Oregon. On July 24th of 1979, 20-year-old Anna Marie Plavaca had been found deceased in her apartment by her sister Rose. When they found her, it was said that she had been R-worded and her life was taken from her with an alarm clock cord. Anna was engaged and she was actually soon to be married when this tragedy happened. And her friends and her family say that she was quiet, she stayed out of trouble, she was kind, and her family had been in so much pain for so many years, not knowing who had done this to her. And you think all this time that goes on, everybody in their mind probably had somebody that they thought it could have been, and nobody thought it was this random creep. Anyways, Jerry's DNA was entered into the national database. When it came back as a match to the samples from underneath Anna's fingernails that had thankfully been saved all these years, her case was solved and her friends and family finally had answers. To my knowledge, or anything that I could find online, Jerry was never officially charged with anything related to Gina or Brian's, murders. And Gina's aunt Jenny was at the courthouse when Jerry was sentenced to the death penalty. And when asked about like how she felt, she said it's not about revenge, it's about removal. And I love that. It gives me chills to think about, because I get it. I get what she's saying. Like, obviously, every time they let this man out, he hurt somebody else over and over and over again. And it's just unreal, unbelievable. So what do y'all think? Have y'all heard about this? What do you think about the whole, like, you know, prisons are getting too crowded, so that means we'll just start letting people out? I think they've probably changed some of those ways, because whenever I was in prison, if you guys don't know, whenever I was 21, I got sentenced to 3 years in state prison in Florida. There was always these rumors, oh, the prisons are getting overcrowded, and they were. I mean, all of it was. I mean, in the county jail, there were times that people were sleeping on mats on the floors because they were overcrowded. And there was all these rumors, oh, they're getting overcrowded, they're going to let people out early. And sometimes they would parole people early, but it was non-violent criminals in the state of Florida. I don't know if it's that way everywhere now. I would hope so. But only non-violent criminals could get a chance to get paroled early. So what do y'all think? Have y'all heard about this story? I always find it interesting when a situation like this, like the situation with Anna, when the DNA is matched years later. All these cases that are unsolved right now, Jelani Day, which is one of the ones that still haunts me. I think about that case and his mother every single day. Summer Wells, I mean, the list goes on and on. There's still a chance. And the people that have caused these disappearances or the ending of some of these people's lives, new technology could come out in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years and solve those cases. And I hope that they do. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Other than that, I love y'all. Thank y'all so much for watching this video. I hope y'all have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Love you guys. Bye.